Myth number 2, closely related to the first myth, is the following myth, which refers to the dreaded and verified overhead. The idea behind this myth is that the money available to the institution should be allocated directly and unequivocally to the cause it represents. On a small scale, this belief has a certain logic, as it aims to ensure that the resources a person contributes with a cause in mind are directly used for that cause. That is to say, if I am going to make a donation to a nonprofit organization that works to provide food to homeless people, it is natural for me to do a calculation in my head and say, "Oh, okay, the amount I contributed can cover the cost of X meals, so I want to see proof that the same number of people were helped." What is hard to see is that for this to happen, an administrative and technical team is needed. Rent, electricity, and water need to be paid, and compliance with the tax authorities is required. So the donor has two options: either go themselves to feed people experiencing homelessness every day, or give it to an organization that also keeps track of how each person is improving, measures their nutrition levels, helps them find a job, and not only feeds a dozen people for a few days, but feeds hundreds every day of the year. To be able to scale a cause, any cause, it is necessary to have those overhead expenses. I know that this idea can sometimes be difficult for people to process for two reasons. The first is that charity and altruism are never completely selfless. There is an egoic component that generates self-satisfaction from performing an act of help. I feel good knowing that I gave a meal to the hungry or a blanket to someone who was cold. In some way, this effect is not the same as saying I paid the administrator's salary or I gave money to pay the rent. The pressure that donors can exert in this regard is considerable and, in general terms, has managed to induce competition among organizations to demonstrate who spends less, who has lower operating costs, to the point of sacrificing impact or results in exchange for reducing costs. Some organizations even go as far as manipulating their figures or outright lying when they claim to operate with 0% overhead, creating an artificial effect of efficiency that has nothing to do with the actual reach or impact of the programs they implement. The second reason is that there is essentially a tendency to inherently view the amount of overhead that is acceptable in terms of a percentage of the available amount. This measure doesn't take into account if the percentage increases, but the amount of available resources increases. As a result of this expense, the total resource will be greater even though the percentage of overhead has increased considerably. That is, the size of the slice of the pie only matters in relation to the size of the pie. In the private sector, some industries such as pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, software, and computer services have an average overhead percentage of around 50%, while in other sectors, such as home appliances, it ranges between 25% and 40%. On one hand, these expenses include the workforce, which in specialized sectors has to be higher than average, facilities, rent, etc., but also why these industries, which are highly competitive, dedicate a good part of their budget to making themselves known and promoting the use of their products, and to developing strategies to expand the market and create more spaces to sell more. The same should happen in nonprofit organizations. How do we break the cycle? The first thing is to shift the focus from the relationship between overhead and the project to indicators that are much more valuable and reflect the performance of a nonprofit organization, such as transparency, governance, leadership, and above all, results. For their part, funders can follow these steps. Increasingly support organizations with general operating funds, whenever possible. If we know it is difficult for donors to provide resources to cover those expenses, you, if familiar with a cause, offer to provide resources to cover those overhead costs. Commit to paying a larger share of the administrative and fundraising costs. Encourage more open debates about overhead, and in doing so, promote the development of a standard definition of the term. This can especially help shift the focus towards the goal of achieving results. On the other hand, nonprofit leaders can also begin to break the cycle by developing a very important strategy that explicitly recognizes the need for infrastructure. Communicate the logic for greater overall investment across the organization and to the board of directors. Provide funders with better ways to measure performance. Please stop separating overhead from the expenses of the 2000 cause, because the cause would not be possible without those overhead expenses. Stop boasting that we have low overhead. Instead, boast about what the overhead allowed us to achieve, such as how every peso invested in overhead enables so many pesos in project expenses. With these points in mind, I want to share my experience in Mexico when we started FONSET, the Conservation Fund for the Triunfo Reserve in Chiapas, Mexico. For those who are not familiar, the state of Chiapas is one of the states with the lowest development index in Mexico, and due to the extent of its areas and natural reserves, it is also home to a large number of organizations dedicated to multiple environmental causes. In that context, the availability of funds from the most obvious sources, large donors, governments, and foundations, seemed quite limited and highly competitive. So it was necessary to raise awareness of the cause among new potential donors. Additionally, it was clear that I couldn't do it alone. I had to hire an administrative assistant who could handle the day-to-day tasks so that I could focus on growing the organization. Additionally, I clearly needed to rent a space where there wasn't so much noise, because at that time, the office was above an agency that played music so loud that the windows vibrated, and I had to get under the desk to make a call to a potential donor. Did any of them ever ask me if I was calling from a party? No, sir, it's just that the music from the business downstairs can be heard all the way up to my office. Anyway, to make a long story short, I didn't have the resources to do all this. Back then, there was only enough money to cover my salary. So I set out to get an initial donation for those overhead expenses. Brochures were printed in English and Spanish. A website was created. I developed a fundraising strategy, and I had the seed capital to start it. I hired my assistant and moved to a new office. That donation did not exceed 300,000 Mexican pesos, but it allowed me to raise the first 11 million. To convince the donor, I had to create a development plan for the financial mechanism, clearly explaining in detail the organizational structure needs, the purpose of each proposed area, and how it would impact the organization's operation, and therefore the results directly linked to the cause in a detailed and comprehensive manner. In my report, I did not state that 100% of the expense went to overhead, but rather that for every peso invested, we raised 37 more. One of the people from whom I have learned the most about this topic is Dan Pallotta, and he explains it very easily. It is useless to keep the slice of the pie small from a small pie. It's about growing the pie and investing in the causes, doing more, reaching more people, restoring more forests, and educating more children. It is important to scale the results because the problems are large and urgent. So let's break the myth that administrative expenses, indirect expenditures, or overhead, whatever you call it, are indeed not the devil, and change the thinking to see these necessary expenses as our wings, which will allow us to move from giving crumbs and feeling good about it to investing big and truly getting closer to having a more just, healthier, and more sustainable world. Of course, always being extremely transparent, responsible, and austere when using it.